Okay, I'm going to talk about chapter 1 of Bertrand Russell, uh, Problems of Philosophy. We were talking about the chapter begins, as I talked about in my previous lecture, discussing the question of what we can know. Is there anything we can know with absolute certainty? And in chapter 1, he's going to use a table as an example of what he's talking about. Um, what do we know? And Russell says, well, if we know anything, we have to begin with our immediate experience. So what do we know about the world? Well, we have eyes and we have ears, and so we look at the world, we listen to the world. What do we know about it? What can we be certain about? So he gives the example of a table. I'm looking at a table. What do I know? I can say, well, I know something with absolute certainty. There's a table there. Um, and then Russell starts discussing, well, what do we really know about the table? It turns out that we don't know anything about the table, the real table, at all. What we know are sense data. What we know are the colors, the sounds, what we know, what we immediately experience of the table. But as to, do we really know the table? No. And Russell gives an example. He says, what's the color of the table? Brown? Well, depending upon how you look at the table, depending upon the lighting situation and so on, the color of the table is going to change. If you change the lighting to a red light, it's going to have a red color. Turn to a blue light, it's going to have a blue color. You turn the light off, it's going to be dark, it's not going to have any color. Depending upon how you look at the table, the direction you're looking at the table is going to have appear differently. And the same thing goes for not only for the color, but for touch, for texture, for everything. So, and he concludes his discussion. He concludes. He says, thus it becomes evident. This is on page 11. Thus it becomes evident that the real table, if there is one. Notice, he says, if there is a real table. He doesn't even know there is a real table. Why not? Because we never perceive the table. What we perceive, Russell says, are sense data. What we immediately are aware of are sense data. Colors, sounds. But what are these sense data of? And that's a question. It's not an easy question to answer. So, he concludes, he says, it becomes evident that the real table, if there is one, is not the same as what we immediately experience by sight or touch or hearing. The real table, if there is one, is not immediately known to us at all, but must be an inference from what is immediately known. Well, there are certain things that we can know. Russell says there are certain things we can absolutely know. What are they? The sense data. We can know colors. These are things that we are immediately acquainted with. But most people think we can know more than that. Russell says you really can't. I can't know that there's a table in front of me. The table that I think is in front of me is an inference from my perception of it. Thus it becomes evident that the real table, if there is one, is not the same as what we immediately experience by sight or touch or hearing. The real table, if there is one, is not immediately known to us at all, but must be an inference from what is immediately known. Hence, two very difficult questions at once arise, namely, is there a real table at all, and if so, what sort of object is it? Now, then Russell goes on to distinguish between two things, sensation and sense data. Sensation is my immediate experience of something. Well, that's a sensation. Sense data are what I am aware of. If I hit the table like that, I'm aware of a sound, a certain sound. That's the sense data. If I look at a color, I see a brown table, then I'm aware of the brown. So sensation and sense data. What we are immediately aware of are sense data. We're not immediately. The question then becomes, what is the relationship of the sense data to the object outside of it? He says the real table, if it exists, we will call a physical object. It's a physical object. We'll call it whatever it is. The real table, if it exists, we'll call it physical object. We'll call it a physical object. Thus, we have to consider the relation of the sense data to physical objects. What is that relationship? It's one of inference. We infer the physical object. The collection of all physical objects, he says, of all physical data, the collection of all physical objects is called matter. Thus, our two questions may be restated as follows. Is there any such thing as matter? And if so, what is its nature? In Chapter 2, he's going to get into the question. Chapter 2, which we'll read next week, has to do with, is there any such thing as matter? That's Chapter 2. So, in Chapter 1, we are quickly led to see that from sense perception, we cannot know, it's very difficult to know what we really do know. The only thing we know with absolute certainty are sense data. Now, as to what we know, that's a very different question. Such questions, what Russell says, are bewildering. And it is difficult to know that even the strangest hypotheses may not be true. Thus, our familiar table, which has roused but the slightest doubts in us hitherto, has become a problem full of surprising possibilities. The one thing we know about it is that it is not what it seems. Okay? That's the appearance reality distinction. The world is not what it seems. In think of Plato's allegory of the cave. We see shadows. What are those shadows of? All right? So, and the same thing we have with Russell. Same problem that Plato had dealt with. The one thing we know about it is that it is not what it seems. Beyond the modest results so far, we have the most complete liberty of conjecture. Leibniz tells us it is a community of souls. So Leibniz will say, well, the table that I think is there is a community of souls. Berkeley tells us that it is an idea in the mind of God. Sober science, scarcely less wonderful, tells us it is a vast collection of electric charges and violent motion. And then the final paragraph of the chapter, he says, among these surprising possibilities, doubt suggests that perhaps there is no table at all. Philosophy, if it cannot answer so many questions as we would wish, has at least the power of asking questions which increase the interest of the world and show the strangeness and wonder lying just below the surface, even in the commonest things of daily life. So, that's chapter 1 of the Problems of Philosophy. So Russell is philosophizes. He's in the empiricist tradition. We haven't read Locke yet, and Berkeley and Hume, but we will be reading those people. But Russell is in that tradition, and Russell, his whole life, he was very interested, obsessed with what we can know with certainty. What can we really know? This question actually begins with Descartes. Descartes was obsessed with the same question back in the 1600s. Anyway, so that's chapter 1 of the Problems of Philosophy. And next week we'll be reading chapter 2. So, this week you read some Plato and Aristotle. So you've read a lot. You've already read a lot of philosophy. So you're kind of getting, I think, a sense of how philosophy works. Philosophy doesn't take anything for granted. And it pursues questions rigorously. And so anyway, next week we'll do chapter 2 problems of philosophy in addition to the other things I've assigned. All right, so I will stop at this point.